In this episode, we move into a topic that sounds simple on the surface, but becomes very important once you understand how organizations actually measure whether they are doing well or drifting off course. Many new learners hear the term Key Performance Indicators, KPIs, and assume it just means any number placed on a report. In reality, KPIs are far more useful and far more disciplined than that. For someone studying certified in Risk and Information Systems Control, CRISC, this topic matters because risk management does not happen in isolation from business performance. Organizations need ways to tell whether important processes are functioning as expected, whether improvement efforts are working, and whether leaders are getting a reliable picture of operational health. A beginner should think of KPIs as focused measures that help answer a practical question. Are we performing in a way that supports our goals, or are we falling short in ways that should trigger attention and possibly action? Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A KPI is a meaningful measure used to evaluate how well a process, function, team, or organization is performing against an intended objective. The phrase meaningful matters because not every number deserves to be treated like a KPI. Some numbers are interesting, some are convenient, and some are easy to gather, but a real KPI is tied closely enough to a goal that leaders can use it to judge whether performance is healthy, weakening, or improving over time. If an organization says it values timely issue remediation, system availability, strong vendor oversight, or reliable access governance, then the KPI should help reveal how well that expectation is being met. For beginners, the easiest way to separate a KPI from ordinary data is to ask whether the measure helps someone make a better decision about performance. If the answer is no, then the number may still be useful for context, but it is probably not functioning as a true KPI in the organization's management process. One reason KPIs matter so much is that organizations often have strong intentions but weak visibility into whether those intentions are becoming reality. A company may say it wants faster issue closure, better service reliability, stronger third-party oversight, or more consistent control execution, but those goals remain abstract unless the organization can measure performance in a disciplined way. KPIs create that discipline by connecting goals to evidence. They help leaders move beyond impressions and anecdotes towards something more structured, even though judgment is still required when interpreting the results. For a beginner, this is an important lesson because it shows that performance management is not separate from risk thinking. If a process performs poorly, risk often increases. If a process performs reliably, risk may be reduced or at least better controlled. KPIs therefore support more than status reporting. They help the organization understand whether daily operations are moving in a direction that supports resilience, accountability, efficiency, and the dependable achievement of business objectives. A common beginner misconception is that a KPI must always be financial, technical, or highly complicated. In practice, a good KPI can be very simple as long as it is relevant and connected to something that matters. The percentage of critical issues remediated on time, the time it takes to remove access after employee departure, the rate of overdue vendor reviews, or the percentage of backup tests completed successfully can all serve as meaningful KPIs if they align with real performance expectations. Another misconception is that more KPIs automatically create better oversight. Usually the opposite is true. Too many measures can bury leaders in data and reduce attention to the few signals that actually matter most. Beginners should understand that the value of a KPI does not come from quantity or complexity. It comes from relevance, clarity, and the ability to reflect something important about how well the organization is functioning in an area tied to its goals, responsibilities, or known areas of exposure. KPIs are especially important in environments where leaders need to know not only whether work is being done, but whether it is being done well enough to support business stability and trust. A process can be active every day and still perform badly. Tickets can be closed, approvals can be recorded, and reports can be published, Yet the organization may still be missing deadlines, tolerating inconsistency, or struggling with weak outcomes. KPIs help expose that difference between activity and performance. For example, it is not enough to know that access reviews occurred. A stronger performance question asks whether they occurred on time, whether they covered the right users, and whether the process led to meaningful correction when inappropriate access was found. For beginners, this is one of the most useful insights in the topic. KPIs are not there to prove that something happened. They are there to help determine whether performance reached the level the organization considers acceptable, dependable, and aligned with its goals. A strong KPI begins with a clear objective because performance cannot be measured well when the organization has not defined what success looks like. If leaders say they want better change management, that is too broad to support a meaningful KPI by itself. Better in what sense? Faster, safer, more consistent, less disruptive, more predictable, or more transparent. A good KPI becomes possible only when the goal is sharpened into something specific enough to evaluate. This is why KPI design begins with understanding the business purpose behind the measure. The organization should know what it is trying to improve, protect, or sustain before deciding how to measure performance. For a beginner, this matters because it explains why weak KPIs are often the result of weak objectives. If the underlying goal is vague, the measure will usually be vague too. Strong KPIs come from strong questions about performance, and those questions must be rooted in business expectations rather than in a random search for available numbers. Another important idea is that KPIs should usually be tied to things the organization can influence through management action, process change, control improvement, training, or governance decisions. If a measure reflects something the team cannot meaningfully affect, then it may not serve well as a performance indicator for that team. This does not mean every KPI must be entirely within one group's control, because many important business outcomes depend on coordination across functions. It does mean the connection between the measure and actual performance responsibility should be clear enough that the results can guide action. For beginners, this is a helpful way to judge whether a proposed KPI is realistic. If performance worsens, can the people reviewing it actually do something useful in response? If performance improves, does that say something meaningful about how the organization is working? A KPI becomes much more powerful when it supports accountability and improvement instead of simply describing a condition that nobody can influence, explain, or change with any confidence. KPIs can be leading or lagging, and that distinction is very useful for understanding what a measure can and cannot tell you. A lagging KPI reflects results that have already occurred, such as the number of service outages during the quarter or the percentage of overdue issues at the end of the month. These measures are useful because they show actual outcomes. A leading KPI points more toward conditions or behaviors that may influence future results, such as the timeliness of control reviews, the volume of unresolved high-priority changes, or the completion rate for important governance tasks. For beginners, the value of this distinction is that it prevents over-reliance on history alone. If an organization watches only lagging KPIs, it may understand what went wrong after the fact, but miss earlier signals that performance was weakening. If it watches only leading KPIs, it may stay busy tracking activity without confirming whether outcomes are actually improving. Strong performance oversight often uses a mix of both, so the organization can see current results and also watch the conditions likely to shape what comes next. A useful KPI should also be understandable, consistently defined, and measured in a way that allows fair comparison over time. If one team defines closure differently from another, or if the reporting period changes from month to month without explanation, the KPI may produce misleading conclusions. Consistency matters because leaders often use KPIs to detect trend, compare units, assess improvement, and decide whether performance is staying within expected ranges. That becomes very difficult if the measure keeps changing its meaning. Beginners should also understand that simplicity is usually an advantage here. A KPI does not become more credible just because its formula is harder to follow. In many cases, the best measure is the one people can understand quickly and still trust because its definition is stable, its purpose is clear, and its calculation is transparent enough that the audience knows what the number really represents. When KPIs become overly complex, they may impress people briefly while reducing long-term confidence in the reporting process. Targets and thresholds give KPIs much of their practical value because a number by itself often says very little. If a report says 68% of critical issues were remediated on time, that figure only becomes meaningful when the audience understands what was expected, what used to be normal, and whether that level is acceptable in the business context. Targets define the desired level of performance, while thresholds help indicate when the result has moved into a range that deserves concern, escalation, or response. For beginners, this is a major reason KPIs become actionable rather than merely descriptive. A number without context can start a conversation, but a number tied to targets and thresholds can support a decision. Strong targets are realistic enough to be taken seriously and demanding enough to encourage improvement. Strong thresholds help leaders distinguish between natural variation and genuine deterioration. Together, they turn the KPI from a passive measurement into a management tool that helps the organization know when performance is healthy, slipping, or moving far enough away from expectations to require intervention. KPIs are often confused with other kinds of indicators, especially risk-focused measures, and that distinction is worth understanding early. A KPI mainly tells the organization how well something is performing against an objective. It focuses on achievement, efficiency, timeliness, reliability, or some other dimension of performance. A risk-focused indicator, by contrast, is more directly concerned with exposure, threat conditions, or the chance that something harmful may occur. The two can influence each other closely, but they are not the same. If issue remediation speed declines, that poor performance may increase risk, but the measure itself is still serving first as a performance indicator. For beginners, this distinction helps keep the purpose of the measure clear. A KPI is not trying to capture every aspect of uncertainty. It is trying to show whether a process or activity is delivering the expected level of performance. That makes KPIs especially useful in management conversations where the question is not only what might go wrong, but also whether the organization is operating strongly enough to support dependable outcomes. A common failure in KPI programs is choosing measures because they are easy to collect rather than because they truly matter. Organizations often have abundant data, but abundance is not the same as usefulness. It may be simple to count how many meetings were held, how many reports were produced, or how many people acknowledged a policy update. Yet those numbers may reveal very little about meaningful performance. Another failure is rewarding the measure so strongly that people begin managing the number instead of the real outcome. They may rush closures, avoid recording problems, or choose easy tasks that improve the metric while leaving the underlying process weak. For beginners, this is a crucial caution. A KPI should support honest understanding, not create theater. If people fear the number more than they value the purpose behind it, the measure may begin distorting behavior. Strong KPI design, therefore, requires regular review to confirm that the indicator is still pointing toward genuine performance rather than encouraging shortcuts, surface compliance, or manipulation of the underlying data. KPI reporting is most effective when it is paired with interpretation and discussion rather than left to stand alone as a number on a dashboard. A trend line may show decline, stability, or improvement, but leaders still need to know why the change occurred, what business impact it may have, and whether action is needed. For example, a drop in on-time review completion may reflect temporary staff turnover, poor process design, growth in business volume, or weakening discipline. The same number can carry very different implications depending on the cause. For beginners, this point matters because it shows that KPIs support judgment rather than replace it. They help focus attention, but people still need to interpret them thoughtfully and connect them to business context. The strongest reporting environments treat KPIs as structured signals that guide conversation, challenge assumptions, and support accountability. They do not pretend that performance can be understood fully through isolated numbers with no narrative, no comparison, and no discussion of what the indicator means for the organization's goals. A simple example can make the whole idea easier to picture. Imagine an organization wants to improve the performance of its third-party review process because delayed assessments have left important vendors operating without timely oversight. A weak approach might track only how many reviews were started during the quarter, which says little about whether performance improved. A stronger KPI might measure the percentage of required vendor reviews completed within the target time frame, supported by a threshold that triggers management attention if the percentage drops below the expected level. Over time, leaders could then examine whether performance is improving, which business units are consistently late, whether added staffing or process changes helped, and whether the trend suggests stronger operational discipline. That example shows why KPIs matter. The organization is not just counting work. It is measuring whether an important process is being performed well enough to support the broader goals of governance, accountability, and risk awareness. That is the practical strength of a well-chosen performance indicator. As we close, the main idea to carry forward is that KPIs help organizations measure whether important processes and activities are performing in ways that support business objectives, operational reliability, and responsible governance. They are not just random statistics, and they are not useful simply because they appear in a report. A strong KPI is tied to a clear objective, connected to meaningful performance, defined consistently, measured with enough discipline to support trust, and interpreted in a business context that helps leaders decide whether action is needed. CRISC expects you to understand that performance measurement supports good risk management because weak performance often becomes risk, and strong performance often helps reduce or stabilize it. For a beginner, that is the heart of the topic. KPIs help the organization answer whether it is doing what it needs to do, whether it is doing it well enough, and whether the current direction should give leaders confidence or concern. When used thoughtfully, they become one of the clearest tools for turning goals into visible, manageable performance.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.